On January 20th, 2025, during his second inauguration at the US Capitol, President Donald Trump made a declaration that shocked environmental communities around the world.
That is why today I will also declare a national energy emergency. We will drill, baby, drill.
Shortly after, his administration moved quickly to roll back regulations on the oil and gas sector, fast-track drilling projects, and expand pipeline construction. For a world already grappling with the escalating climate crisis, this was a pretty devastating blow. The year 2024 was officially the hottest on record, with global surface temperatures reaching 1.29 degrees Celsius above the 20th century average, making it the warmest year in recorded history, spanning from 1850 to 2024. The consequences of this warming affect everything and everyone on this planet. Weather becomes more extreme, sea levels rise, causing flooding, entire ecosystems get disrupted, and food and water shortages become more common. For younger generations who have grown up acutely aware of these dangers, it's easy to feel hopeless about the future of our planet, and honestly, that fear is justified. But in the past few years, advancements to mitigate the impact of climate change have accelerated at rates we could have never predicted. So let's dive into the climate crisis, debunk the lingering myths and misinformation surrounding it, and ask the big question, is there still hope for our future? Spoiler alert, there is. A quick lesson in environmental science. What causes global temperatures to rise? At the most basic level, it comes down to excess CO2 or other greenhouse gases getting trapped in our atmosphere. When we burn fossil fuels for energy, transportation, and industry, we release gases like carbon dioxide and methane into the air. These gases absorb infrared radiation from the sun and re-radiate it in all directions, including back toward Earth's surface, trapping heat in the atmosphere. Essentially, greenhouse gases act like a thermal blanket, preventing heat from escaping into space and warming the planet. This isn't speculation. It's backed by well-established physics, direct atmospheric measurements, satellite data, global climate models, and historical climate records. So why, despite all this overwhelming evidence, do so many people still believe climate change is exaggerated or, in some cases, a complete myth? The short answer is because people can be stupid. The long answer is because people have lost faith in our political and educational institutions. I've already touched on the growing distrust many Americans have in the government, and I believe this plays a significant role in why there are so many climate change deniers in the US. This skepticism toward institutions, including scientific organizations and government agencies, leads some people to question or outright reject climate science. Many see it as a broader agenda they distrust, often believing it's being used as a tool for government overreach and population control. Another reason some of the older generations might make the claim that climate change predictions are bogus is because of the inaccuracy of the past. For instance, in the 1970s, a group of scientists believed the Earth might be heading into its next ice age. A few decades prior, this Serbian mathematician Milutin Milankovic proposed that Earth undergoes warming and cooling cycles roughly every 100,000 years due to gradual shifts in its position relative to the Sun. While Mitchell's data was limited to a portion of the northern hemisphere, it still sparked widespread public interest, leading to numerous speculative articles in newspapers and magazines about the potential onset of an ice age. And as a result, many now point to these exaggerated claims as evidence that scientists can't predict the future, using it to argue that concerns about climate change are overblown. In the same vein, people also like to use this kind of data to say, oh, well, the Earth has always warmed and cooled over time. It's just going through one of its natural cycles. But today's climate change consensus is vastly different from this and anything but natural. Modern climate predictions are based on decades of more precise data, including temperature records, ice cores, and advanced computer models. Today, there is a broad scientific consensus on climate change, with over 97% of climate scientists agreeing that climate change is real and driven by human activities. Nothing about the speed at which the Earth is warming is happening naturally. It's because of us. Well, more specifically, it's because of a select few of us. Although you're going to see how much bigger of an impact monopolies have on carbon emissions than your actions do, I think we all like using our own agency to create more sustainable practices in our everyday life. And to help with that, you can try out today's sponsor, HelloFresh. HelloFresh is a meal kit service that delivers step-by-step recipes and fresh, pre-portioned ingredients right to your door. It's perfect for people who want to know exactly what is going in their food, but also for people who want to know that their food is coming from a sustainable source. Subscribing to HelloFresh reduces your carbon footprint by 31% compared to cooking with the same ingredients from a supermarket due to them having a shorter supply chain. You can choose from over 50 recipes that are put together by their professional chefs, and I recently made their roasted zucchini and garlic flatbread. A lot of you still don't know this, but I love cooking for myself and making most of my meals from scratch, and this recipe was fire. What's also really cool about HelloFresh is their new Build a Plate feature. Basically what they do is provide the main dish component, but also give you various different sides and toppings to add on, so each of your family members can personalize their plate based on their meal preferences. It's a really awesome service that's influencing more people to cook from scratch and be more conscious about the environmental impact of their food. So if you are interested, you can click the link in the description or use my code Hastings MAR10 and you'll get 10 free meals plus free breakfast for life. One breakfast item per box while subscription is active if you're in the US. The link and code are valid in all countries and the respective local discount will apply. I'm going to go over some other ways you can reduce your carbon emissions later on in the video, but let's be clear. The biggest contributors to the drastic rise in global temperatures are not you. It's not even Taylor Swift jetting around on her private plane, as much as I'd love to blame her for impacting the climate with her unseasoned music. The real culprits are the massive energy companies. A continued dominant public narrative about climate change is that we are all to blame and focuses on how the individual can reduce their carbon footprint to make a huge difference in the world. But individual consumption will never address the root cause of climate change. Holcim, the largest private building materials company in the world, emitted 156.3 million metric tons of CO2 in 2020. That is 0.45% of the total global carbon emissions and almost 19,000 times the amount of gas that Taylor Swift's flights emitted that same year. In 2023, it was found that half of the world's CO2 emissions come from just 36 fossil fuel firms. That is an absurd amount of damage being done by a very, very small percentage of people. And instead of taking accountability or changing their policies, these people in power are trying to downplay their impact through propaganda and bribery. A 2021 study analyzing 180 ExxonMobil climate change communications, including peer-reviewed publications, internal documents, and advertorials in the New York Times, found that ExxonMobil's advertisements aim to shift the responsibility for global warming away from the fossil fuel industry and onto consumers. They framed climate change as a risk rather than a reality, claimed renewable energy was unreliable, and suggested that the fossil fuel industry was taking meaningful leadership on climate change. This isn't surprising, given that ExxonMobil has also been known to lobby American political parties, particularly the current Republican Party, to maintain its power and profits. They even paid a corrupt West African oil company $120 million for oil exploration rights. So no, unfortunately, switching to that paper straw won't stop multi-billion-dollar industries from pumping millions of tons of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, and that's not to deter you from doing what you can to reduce your own carbon emissions. It's just the reality of things. I feel like I didn't fully explain the implications of an increasingly hotter planet in enough detail, so let me break down some of the more frequent disasters we can expect if this trend continues. I'm not sharing this to add to any sense of hopelessness. There will be good news coming at the end. I'm just trying to do this to highlight the severity of what will happen if we don't take more action. Every 1/10 of a degree that the Earth warms has significant consequences on our ecosystems and human systems. Firstly, the intensity and frequency of extreme weather events start to rise. Since the 1960s, heat waves have become significantly more frequent and severe, leading to thousands of preventable deaths and placing immense strain on ecosystems and infrastructure. The 2003 heat wave in Europe, for example, was responsible for approximately 70,000 deaths. My editor, who's going to be editing this video and who lives in Argentina, also messaged me recently about how much hotter it's getting there and how the heat waves caused power outages in his area. According to a 2020 study from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, tropical cyclones in the Atlantic Ocean have been increasing in intensity too, particularly in terms of Category 4 and 5 storms. A study published in the journal Nature Communications found that wildfire activity in the western US has increased dramatically due to rising temperatures, prolonged droughts, and changing precipitation patterns. We just saw how that played out recently in the Palisades. Flooding in places like South Asia and the coastal US is becoming more common, and the rising ocean temperatures severely disturb aquatic ecosystems as well. The 2016 and 2017 bleaching events were particularly devastating, caused by rising ocean temperatures linked to climate change. Here in the US, we hear stories like this all the time on the news, but because it doesn't affect most of us, many of us just turn a blind eye to it. Nobody in any social circle I've been in for many years has made climate change the focal point of most of our conversation or any of our conversations. And maybe that says something about me, but it really is the case that most Westerners are immune to the natural disasters that are a direct consequence of climate change, at least for the time being. If things continue to get worse, however, everybody is going to suffer at a much larger scale. But now is the time where I give you your prescription of hopium, because there are many reasons to be hopeful. And it starts with the Paris Agreement. Let me preface this by saying this section of the video is not a result of my own research or simple Google searches. Most of the information comes from the YouTube channel Simon Clark, who has created some really phenomenal content addressing both the positive and negative strides we've made in tackling climate change. I'm just here to pass along what I've learned from his work. The Paris Agreement is an international treaty on climate change that was adopted by 196 countries at the UN Climate Change Conference on December 12, 2015. The primary goal of the agreement is to limit global warming to well below 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels, with an ambitious target of limiting the increase to 1.5 degrees Celsius. This would greatly reduce the risks and impacts of climate change. To achieve this, each country that is part of the treaty is responsible for setting and pursuing its own climate action goals. Now, prior to this agreement, scientists expected the Earth to warm by 4 degrees Celsius by the year 2100, which would have been astronomically bad, like entire civilizations being wiped out bad. But now, current government policies are expected to limit that warming by 2.7 degrees by 2100. And if long-term policies, which aren't really close to passing yet, get enacted, that could go all the way down to 2.1 degrees. Is that good enough? Not really, no, but it is a start, and it cannot be overstated just how significant a shift that is, from a predicted 4-degree warming down to a 2.1 degree cooling. That is huge. If we're optimistic and we assume all net zero targets are met, that can get down to as low as 1.8 degrees Celsius. And we can do this without undermining economic growth too, like big companies don't want to do. If we look at the change in per capita CO2 emissions and GDP, many countries have seen their GDP per capita continue to go up, while their CO2 emissions have continued to go down. And now in many cases, using solar power as energy over fossil fuels is ridiculously cheap. In fact, it's the cheapest electricity in history. China, which is the country with the largest CO2 emissions, added more solar capacity in 2023 alone than the United States has in its entire history. And just last year, they added another 350 gigawatts of solar and wind energy to their grid. But it's not just China. Over 30% of all electricity comes from renewable sources now, with some countries in South America having almost 100% of their electricity come from wind and hydropower. And as a result, it's likely fossil fuel generation peaked in 2023 for good. As for the other sectors that are the biggest contributors to climate change, like heat and travel, these are seeing some positive changes too. In Norway, for example, 60% of houses are now heated by a heat pump, which is basically a device that moves heat between a warm and cool space using electricity. And 9 out of 10 vehicles bought last year in Norway were electric vehicles. Meanwhile, in China, most cars sold now are electric, and many other forms of transportation are shifting to electric as well. As renewables start becoming more widely used and available around the world, the prices of these things will fall, making them more feasible for the average person. The steel and cement industries, which are major contributors to global carbon emissions, are also making strides towards sustainability, despite being notoriously difficult to decarbonize. They're adopting green energy solutions like green hydrogen and electric furnaces. But what about land use? Deforestation, a significant driver of global warming, contributes to the problem because forests act as carbon sinks, removing CO2 from the atmosphere. However, since 2000, carbon emissions from land use have decreased by 30%. In the Amazon, deforestation has even been halved in the past 2 years, showing positive progress in combating one of the planet's biggest environmental challenges. There's even more positives I could dive into, but I think you get the idea. While our efforts still haven't been enough, that doesn't mean we shouldn't be celebrating the progress we have made, especially if that celebration motivates us to take more action. And despite a small number of companies having the most power over climate change, there are things you can do to influence things or to help. Get involved with activism, support renewable energy, and use public transportation, or simply walk or bike whenever possible. Reduce your waste and consumption by learning about practices like regenerative farming, which helps restore soil, water, and biodiversity. And support products that contribute to these changes. Yes, it has been shown that eating less red meat and dairy reduces your carbon footprint, but if you still do eat some of those, then try to opt for the regeneratively raised or sustainably sourced products whenever you can. However, I believe the most powerful actions you can take are first, raising awareness and educating people about the climate crisis, and second, voting for leaders who prioritize climate action. By embodying the lifestyle of someone who's climate conscious, you'll influence those around you to care more about climate change, which ironically might be more impactful than the actions you do themselves. You also have the ability to educate yourself about which political leaders are the strongest and weakest advocates for climate change. Ultimately, the leaders we elect will shape the policies that influence the world's largest corporations and in turn drive the greatest impact on climate change. One thing you just can't deny about all the progress that is made, that I will never, ever bet against, is the indomitable human spirit when it's directed towards optimism. When humans are optimistic, but their optimism stays rooted in fact, it's absurd how much we can accomplish and how many problems once thought insurmountable we can solve. Humans are great at creating new problems, yes, but we're also pretty damn good at solving the problems we've created, eventually. While there's still a ton of work to be done, I am hopeful. Don't just sit around idly feeling powerless. Empower yourself through optimistic action, even if that action doesn't produce the results we're all hoping for. After all, what else can we do? I'll be leaving a lot of resources in the description to other channels who are way better educated on the climate crisis and things you can do to mitigate the impact. So check out the description for those. And most of my channel now is focused on exploring modern issues and how we can solve them. So if you want to check out other videos by me, you can click right here. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Thank you for becoming more self-aware, hopefully. Goodbye.